Hello, everybody. Welcome to PETV Presentations, Season 1, Episode 20. This is our season finale. Season 2 will begin in January, and so we'll have a little bit of break, just about a month of a break. And I'm really excited for Season 2, all the great people we got on, and I'll talk a little bit about that after the show. If you guys want to see all 20 episodes of what we've been doing this season, you can head over to tv.permaethos.com. I encourage you to subscribe to the newsletter so you can get updates on when videos are posted and when new shows are coming up. When we have the lineup all finalized, you'll get a list of all the presenters, and then you'll be able to pre-subscribe to each of those presentations. Today, we have with us Eddy Garcia. Eddy grew up in a small Hawaiian island in Molokai. That's in Hawaii. He's been learning through over 3 decades of observing nature and living off-grid. Eddy has created state-of-the-art closed-loop regenerative agriculture systems that are productive and aesthetic. And Garcia's motivation is in his design process, or the motivation in his design process is to build systems that mimic nature. And we're very excited to have Eddy today here with us. And also our co-presenter Sam is with us joining. She'll be sharing the presentation slides, and Eddy will be talking. So anyway, welcome to the show, guys.
Cool. Oh, is that my intro there? Okay.
No,
hi, everybody.
It's your intro. Let me talk a little bit about how this works in case anybody hasn't done this before. There is the chat bar. On the bottom, you'll see a button that says chat. That's where you guys can talk with each other as you're watching Eddy give his presentation. And there's also a Q&A button. So while Eddy's giving his presentation or right after his presentation, go ahead and hit that Q&A button and ask any questions you have. After Eddy's done giving his presentation, I'll read through all of your questions, and Eddy will spend some time giving his answers for us. So that's kind of how it works. If at any time Eddy asks for a show of hands, like how many people are paying attention, there's a raise your hand button, and you can click on that. Now I see a couple people already clicking it. So that's the basic fundamentals of how this presentation will work, guys. And yep, you can lower your hand. We got it, guys. Sam's got it too.
That's fine.
All right.
Okay.
So, without further ado, Eddy, how are you today? And welcome to the show.
I don't know how to explain it, but we'll start taking our time to do it. Okay. So we're going to actually start off the first picture that you guys will be looking at here. This is Halava Valley on Molokai. It's a perfect sort of a circular ecosystem. It has 3 waterfalls on the top that feed into the valley, ocean down at the bottom. It's kind of nurtured between the 2 arms, like it's half a caldera. So just a really great place to be able to grow up and observe nature. I didn't really go to school. I sort of dropped out in the 4th, 5th grade. My lessons in agriculture have been from survival, learning how to grow my food, hunting, fishing, and surfing, and wanting to surf all day, so I had more time. So I've sort of come to my version of aquaponics through trial and error and a lot of observation. And that started out here in this, which you see. So the purpose of this presentation is to introduce you to aquaponics if you aren't yet familiar with it. We're going to go through what's called standard aquaponics, which most people, there's a pretty big science of it nowadays. I think it's started out in the last 15 years or so. We're going to introduce you to that, and then we're going to explain what hydroponics and aquaponics are, and then the version that we do of it, which is a little different. What you're looking at in front of you is a natural system. We're going to come down to the next slide here, and we're going to start showing you just different examples of some of these systems. This one, I don't know how well you guys can see it there. That's an aquaponic system made out of recycled parts next to a solar array and a vertical windmill. That's a starter aquaponics for a bigger pond on the property. You can go to the next slide. that actually nurtures and takes care of the whole 26 acres or so. Oh, I may be mixing ponds up. Excuse me. This is a pond from another one. That pond didn't make it onto our slide, but it's very similar to this one as well. I think it's a bigger one. So it nurtures the 26 acres in that you don't have to bring in a nitrogen-based fertilizer. There's fish in the pond, and there's several other creatures that play out a balanced system, and they create fertilizers through basically using the bathroom. I mean, that's the simplest way for me to explain it. And instead of, okay, so what, this is good. This will help me there. We went on to another slide here. Let's explain the difference between hydroponics and aquaponics. Hydroponics is what aquaponics is based off of. The cultivation of plants by placing roots in the liquid nutrient solutions rather than in soil. So we're basically using an inert medium to grow food, and we're adding a chemical-based fertilizer to it. Can we take that off of there? Yeah. Yeah, and we're taking a chemically based fertilizer, and we're giving it to the plants as a main flow, sort of intravenously almost in a sense, and we're not really needing soil to grow in. These systems are based on petroleum synthetic fertilizers or ammonium nitrate based fertilizers, which wind up in the long run turning into residual salts that are left over in our environment that have to be dealt with. There are organic nutrients available for this process, and you can also do organic, I don't know, I need to give you some quote signs with my hands, kind of making fun of that. Some organic based nutrient solutions, but without living creatures, they're not able to process that material. I'm trying to read this off of a script to keep me on track, but as well as just talk to you guys, so bear with me. In an organic based hydroponic system, you still run into the same flaws, that there's not enough biological life there to process the chemicals that they're putting in. And so even though it may be a bone meal or feather meal based organic fertilizer or fish emulsion that they're putting it in there, it's still winding up as residual salts in the environment. So that's one flaw to hydroponics. It also has much lower nutrient density than either conventionally farmed or organically farmed food. It just doesn't get the density of it. Did I lose something in one of those? Okay. Due to the loss to the loss of topsoil on the planet and the repercussions of bad farming practices that have been done on this planet, hydroponics has many incredible advantages. Being able to set up entire farms indoors or on a slab of concrete. The fact that you can recirculate water in the cycle that allows for plants to grow using much less water, and it can be run off solar. But unfortunately, being based on a non-living chemical fertilizer for the most part, we can improve upon that, and that's where aquaponics comes in. Just bear with me for a second. My argument on growing things in living soil and with regenerative farming practices versus using chemical and conventional fertilizers. You can grow food with conventional fertilizers fine, but you cannot grow soil. If we want to be stewards of this earth and take care of it, we have to leave soil for the future generations. So what I mean by so much bad practices of farming that are based on the Nobel experiments in the early 1900s that realized that you can mimic nitrogen in plants with petroleum-based fertilizers, we were able to argue that you can grow food and you can feed the planet with it. And it was true. But you can't grow soil with it. And what happens is, after we've done so many cycles of petroleum fertilizer and we haven't really built up the living creatures in the soil, they tend to sort of disappear through the buildup of salts and different things in the soil. So the idea of farming, and every time you farm the soil getting better, trying to base it on things that are soil builders like earthworms and little creatures that eat the leaves that fall and regenerate it back into the circle. That's kind of what we're trying to share here. So we have to start thinking out of the box. The idea of incorporating technology and nature together, that's where I like to come in. Because I've been able to produce my own electricity since before I was a teenager. I've been building solar panels and putting batteries together and taking little engines apart. Then I was able to sort of think, how can I get the water from this pond down the hill to water my plants? Watching the leaves on the stream pile up and the earthworms eventually go underneath them and look underneath that, and all of a sudden there's a great beautiful pile of dirt underneath there. I can take that and I can put it on my taro plants, and all of a sudden my taro is very big. So it's like really just simple observation that have brought me to some of these conclusions. The concept of hydroponics, as I said earlier, has some really good traits to it. Not having to have a great amount of land to use, and a lot of other things. So the idea of incorporating that with living creatures in it, I think that helps a lot. So I'm going to explain now aquaculture. And aquaponics is basically a marriage of aquaculture and hydroponics together. So you're trying to take the attributes of one and mix them with the other. So we're going to get into the cultivation of aquatic animals and plants, especially fish, shellfish, seaweed, in a natural or controlled marine environment. How it's been done for a long time now. People are basically raising fish, putting them in an enclosed area, and feeding them essentially dog food. It's basically large bulk food, close quarters, a lot of waste product, creating CO2 gases because they're not typically reusing the materials. So aquaponics actually incorporates reusing some of those materials that aquaculture would normally let turn into something detrimental, or it would just totally go to waste. So the marriage of those two. There's a positive side of aquaculture. If it's done right, potentially we can farm fish, prawns, oysters. We can farm anything for food, but the economics have kind of taken a hold of it, I feel personally, and have gotten it out of control where someone commercially would rather feed it dog food and then feed that to you because they can produce it for a much lower dollar in a quick time.
Do you want to go through the numbers of aquaculture and how they subsidize and stuff?
Do I have that on here anywhere?
No,
I think because I don't have a fact sheet in front of me right now, if you look at aquaculture, the way it's done right now, it's like a lot of the other farming industry. A lot of it is subsidized because in order to bring 1.5 pound fish to market in 6 months to 9 months, you have to feed it an overwhelming amount of food. It may cost you $5 to raise a fish you're going to sell for $4. It's actually not that high. It's about 90 cents for a fish you're going to sell for $1 a pound, basically, is what it equates to. And the foods that they're bringing in are basically cotton meal, soy meal, corn meal. A lot of that's GMO byproduct at times, which we're not even going to get into that really. I'm not, or just giant from the industry, or if it's some sort of fish meal, a lot of the times it could be scraped from the bottom of the ocean or taken from less than ethically sourced. And that, again, leads to the problem. So the idea of a different concept of aquaculture where you can raise your fish for longer, you don't need them to grow out as fast, you can feed them some sort of an organic diet, maybe a diet that they grow. That's actually what we do. They grow their own food. And you can harvest the fish in a longer time. Instead of expecting a return of 6 months, maybe you're expecting a return of 18 months. But for sustainable purposes and look into the future of how we do things so that you can have a fish that doesn't have to be treated with tons of antibiotics or just fed inferior feed, that's what you're ultimately eating later on. So the idea of building systems that you're going to look at holistically. You're going to take what we do in the ground when we're building soil, and we're going to put that into a medium that could be done on the space shuttle, basically, an island in itself. So as I said before, I put some of this onto pages to try to stay on track, and it's not usually my style to speak to you guys. So if you guys bear with me, I'm jumping between looking at pages in front of me and trying to stay on track with what I share with a lot of people through our education program. So we have another, this is an aquaponic system in front of you. This is kind of a standard aquaponic system. A lot of people don't realize that aquaponic systems, they actually work in saltwater or in freshwater, just like aquaculture. if you build a saltwater aquaponic system, you have the ability to grow different creatures in it, like oysters and different types of seaweed, sponges, all sorts of different things that you're able to grow and nurture through these systems. I think we're going to see a lot of that in the future as people are trying to look at more sustainable solutions to feed ourselves, because we're just depleting our resources one after the other. So what we try to look for in a system is biodiversity. What you're looking at in front of you there is a giant river prawn juvenile that you grow in one of the tanks. So let's go into a diagram here. And I guess the arrows point themselves out. We're going to start out with a pump and a tank that has fish in it. Can I move that out of the way? Oh, wait, no, I can't. Oh, never mind. I can see it right here. Okay. We're going to pump the tank, the fish water out of the tank, and we're going to pump it into another tank. I call this a biofiltration or sediment tank. And the reason I throw these into the system, there's a lot of different biofiltration tanks that are using surface area, and a bacteria lives on the surface area, and that helps process the water through what's called a nitrifying process. There's a couple of bacteria that are present, and they help process the ammonia and the nitrogen from the fish and turn it into a product that's basically usable for the plants and harmless to the fish. So basically, there you go. You found a way to filter the water for the fish. Potentially, these fish in here are tilapia, and they're vegetarians for the most part, so they can eat the same plants that grow in this pipe. So you basically, you get the gist of things here. This is the basic idea of aquaponics, and we're going to keep going into it. Let's go into the next one here. Here's an aquaponic system made out of a bunch of recycled pipes and old trash in the yard, sewer pipe. And in the forefront of that picture is some azolla, which is a floating water fern, super high in protein and edible for the fish. So that's their food that they're growing for them. You can raise vegetables in the system, any kind of vegetables you can think of, anything from broccoli to kale to tomatoes. I've done potatoes, taro, eggplants. I think there's a flowering kale on the bottom of that picture. The other beauty of aquaponics is that what we talked about earlier with the hydroponic system, one of the negatives to it was that it leaves chemical salts behind and such. An aquaponic system, you're not adding anything to it in there to be chemical salts. And the fish using the bathroom becomes a fertilizer, and that's processed by the creatures that live in the system. So you can get all the same positive effects of hydroponics without the negative effects of hydroponics. So that's a cool plus of that we wanted to share and what we're getting into. So what are we going to go into? Okay, we're going to use what I was talking about just a second ago, and here's a good diagram of it. The nitrifying process, real basic there. Fish poops, comes out as ammonia and nitrites. The bacterias, one of them, nitrosamona and a nitrobacter, they basically turn the nitrites into nitrates. The nitrates are the harmless material for the fish and usable by plants. So we just figured we'd show you a diagram for keep it really simple. Let's go over this again. Nitrosomonas convert ammonia to nitrite. Nitrobacters convert nitrite to nitrate. These bacteria are useful to plants and harmless to fish. Plants use nitrates for plant growth. So we're going to talk about oxygen. That's our next factor in this, is I think that you can't have a system with too much oxygen. When you hear the word aerobic versus anaerobic, anaerobic is without oxygen, aerobic is with oxygen. Anything that you consider having a bad smell to it for the most part, if something's decomposing, that's usually anaerobic bacteria at work. They both have a place, and the anaerobic bacteria is not necessarily bad. It just has a place and a time. When it comes to animals being exposed to it, bacteria that's prone to be from aerobic decomposition, and having a lot of oxygen in the water with it tends to be healthier. And when we think about beneficial bacteria and such, that's where we get into that word aerobic. So it's the same for your fish or your prawns or your oysters or just about anything you're growing. You want to be able to have a lot of oxygen in the system. There's a lot of creative ways to get oxygen just by how you set the system up and how you let the water flow. Plants convert CO2 into oxygen through photosynthesis during the day, but at night, it's a whole different story. This is only when the lights are on. A lot of people, we tend to miss that at times and think that plants are producing oxygen all the time. It's really just a conversion thing. As the sun moves around the planet, the plants using the sunlight turn CO2 into oxygen, and then at night, it does the exact opposite. And that's sort of the balance. Plants' roots always need oxygen to process their food. The same is true for fish. So at nighttime, you may have a system that's full of plants. And at nighttime, these plants are using oxygen. And in the daytime, they're using oxygen. The only difference is in the daytime, they're on the top level, they're taking CO2 and turning it into oxygen they can use. So it's really important to have absorbed oxygen in your water. And we'll go through a few different ways of how to do that. That can be anything from an air stone to a waterfall to an aerator. But okay, let's go on to the next thing here. Okay, standard aquaponics, which we just basically showed you. If I was to say one of the negative things about aquaponics, not necessarily negative, but a lot of the aquaponic systems tend to mimic hydroponic systems, using only those bacteria really that we just talked about for the nitrifying process. They try to keep quite a bit of organic material out of the medium and flush they use clay balls for the most part. I think I have some pages that I'm going to read off that in a second, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. Okay, so I've come to a bit of a different solution. How I've been growing food for the last few decades, I was later informed that could be labeled as aquaponics. I see this as sort of collective consciousness of the universe. I've been observing and practicing through trial and error from the time I was a small child. I realized that the cycle of the creatures, and as the water runs down the stream by trickling over the stones, it puts more oxygen in the stream. I can just tell that by observing it, smelling it, seeing what's growing there, the life that's going on around it. Aquaponics basically embodies all of the positive attributes of hydroponics with more nutrient-rich food and the least detrimental byproduct. The flaws in conventional aquaponics, as I just said again, are because it's based not on a huge biodiversity, it's working just off a couple of factors rather than try to encompass a more holistic approach. And what I mean by that is the hydroponic system indoors, you have to control the environment, and if one creature gets in there, it can totally set the whole room into mass chaos. Where if there's already a biodiversity of creatures in there, they'll deal with it themselves. They'll come up to a balance. And that's kind of like what we're trying to do in a given environment. I'm going to start reading off this again as well. For instance, in nature, calcium is very important for plants. There are tiny creatures that shed their exoskeletons and then are used by bacteria and broken down into calcium that is available for plants in aquatic situations or in regular soil. So the idea of incorporating all these different creatures that will shed their skin, that will eat detritus, that will process and go through the fish waste, as well as the detritus and everything else that's left over in the tank, they help process it and create more of the beneficial bacteria. So if we take into account the biodiversity of living soil and we try to implement that into a living stream system, how plants and creatures interact, this is how I've come up with the idea of a living aquaponic system. With a bit more biodiversity, and aquaponic systems has less of a tendency to crash. The creatures that form the symbiotic relationships themselves actually help to balance the system. And that's key, having balance rather than one side of the pendulum or the other. You will have crashes and different things that can happen, but they're a lot more in balance. How are we looking? We're doing all right? Okay. I talked about this before. I think there's a picture of clay balls up here. You'll notice that they're really clean. You don't see a lot of stuff inside of there. We're going to get into how we build our mediums and what we see in an aquaponic system. So there's fish on the other side of this. There's a sediment tank and probably a sump. The water's pumped up to these little tubes in the center. It's run through the clay balls, and that's where the plant is growing in that medium. Let's go on.
Clay balls are standard aquaponics uses for the most part.
Oh yeah, and that's why I say that the aquaponics mimics a lot of the hydroponics, because that's what I've seen more than often sold as the medium for aquaponic systems. I tend to use crushed rock from the local area. Crushed rock from the local area seems to me to be able to work with whatever the natural bacteria are in the area as well, and it seems to coordinate with a given environment. Unless you're doing it indoors and you're going to have it outside and not have it, you know, I mean, the idea of an open environment, that brings more balance into it. So in our systems, we actually encourage organic matter within the medium. We use several different types of worms and other creatures to process and make that material usable for the plants. We also try to incorporate biomass created by the system into the in-ground farming we have around the areas around our aquaponic systems. So for us, these aquaponic systems that we're building, a lot of the time they're on a larger scale, reconverting people's swimming pools into aquaponic systems that then nurture their landscape around them and allow them to have self-sufficient properties. Some of the biomass that we grow in the tanks, I think I showed it to you earlier, that's like an azolla, a duckweed, any water plant. We'll get into this in a moment as well. We can grow. When I mean a biomass, I'm talking about anything you can produce out of the system that can be turned into compost to build soil that the earthworms can eat, mix it with the soil, and create living earth. That's what this is really based on. So the idea of this being sort of a hub of fertility, I'm sure I'll repeat myself with that again.
Oh, this is a video.
So let's take a look at this. We're gonna play a video here, and this was a parking lot in Southern California that was basically decomposed granite, crushed stone, and it had been parked on for decades, part of a nursery. It had been inundated through the plants that were put on the top with 16 fertilizers. There's an asphalt road that comes down to it. We cut dips and actually allowed the rain to permeate into it. We also run water in the blue line that you see there out of a swimming pool. We took off a chlorine filterization, and what we did, can they hear me right now?
Yeah.
Okay, and we incorporated the back flush of the living pool on the top into this system while we grew certain plants out of the nitrogen that provided, and we cut them down in place, and then we added earthworms into it. Actually, we added earthworms real early into the game, 3 different types. One that goes deep, one that's a medium dweller, and one that's a top dweller. A lot of these other creatures that just flash before your face, I'm going to get into them in a second. Same biodiversity that we have living in the system will overflow into the surrounding area, and that creates fertility. So we're talking about we unpaved a parking lot and put in a paradise. This is in 8 months' time. There's over 6 to 8 inches of topsoil now built on top of this. It's like actually mind-blowing. So let's go on to the next slide. Some of the creatures that are present in the systems. Up on the top there, you see a gammarus. It's an amphipod. There's copepods, pill bugs, millipedes. Some of the things you see to the far right, lower right hand and lower left hand. The one on the left-hand side is a mycelium from a mycorrhizal culture that we put in. We actually start piles of wood chips and compost, and we inoculate it with cultures that we grab from underneath trees in the surrounding area. And then we nurture those indigenous cultures to the area, and then we incorporate them with the standard protocol of things that we add into there, which is mycorrhizal culture. The picture on the right lower screen, that is the nodules from a nitrogen fixing bacteria, a rhizobia, and that's a bean plant. That's an edible green lake bean or such that's growing in the aquaponic system. It has the ability to utilize that nitrogen and fix it into the soil medium so that it can be used. Center stage, there's redworms, and to the right top, there is what you guys know as a roly-poly or a pill bug. All these guys process organic material. They break it down for plants to be able to use. The definition of dirt is rock material mixed with organic matter and broken down with basically, for the most part, humic acid. So when we talk about humus and topsoil, that's something that's created by living creatures. You can't create that through synthetic fertilizers. It just doesn't happen. But Mother Nature's perfect. So if you look at the examples that are left in front of us, we can copy that and we can come to systems that actually will feed our great-great-great-grandchildren. Instead of being where we're at right now, I'm going to recommend a really good book for everyone here. I think that if you guys, it is David Montgomery, and it is called The Dirt, The Erosion of Civilizations. So I'm going to give you guys a second if you guys have a pen or a way to write that down. And the reason I'm telling you this is it's a really factual account of how civilizations again and again have failed through bad farming practices. Their economic systems were set upon it. And when they started to fail, because of overworking the soil, it definitely affected. So I'm not making this like a factual statement, like this is the fail of all civilizations, but there is truth in this for that. And the name of the author is David Montgomery, and it is called Dirt, D-I-R-T, The Erosion of Civilizations. And that's on our reading list of our website, I believe, as well. That gives a really good account all the way back down to the Fertile Crescent of how the astonishing number I'm going to give you guys right now is that we're down to 2% of our original topsoil on the planet. That includes the national forest, the Amazon, everywhere. Now, if you can believe that our agriculturally sound soil in the areas that are known for farming, we're 2% of the original topsoil on the planet. That's heavy, and that's like really crazy. So what we need to be able to do is we need to be able to fix the mistakes of our forefathers, whose intention was good, to grow food and to share, that's really important. But they've made mistakes. And now we sit in a day and age through technology and observation and our understanding that we can build soil. And if we're thinking out of the box creatively, we can build soil at an astounding rate. And by building soil, we also sequester carbon. So whether you're a greenhouse believer or not, it's still not a bad idea to take CO2 and stuff it into the ground rather than have it in our atmosphere. This is fact. We all know this. Or we should all know this. So the idea of being able to build soil, that's what this is based on. I'm going to get back on track here. So our systems are based more as hubs of fertility. In order to understand what we're creating, with these, you have to look at all the different cultures that we throw into a system, such as mycorrhizal fungus, azotobacter, and other nitrogen-fixing bacteria. Azotobacter is not spoken of too much, but that's a free-flowing nitrogen-fixing bacteria that doesn't need a host, like a rhizobia that needs a big bean plant or some type of legume to fix nitrogen from the atmosphere. Azotobacter is a free-flowing nitrogen-fixing bacteria that is able to just utilize organic material in the soil and pull nitrogen from the atmosphere and break it down, and also not tying up nitrogen in the process of breaking down things and making it unavailable to plants. And that's really crucial to understand in this. That may go over some people's heads. Other people will understand that right off the bat. I'm trying not to be too scientific as well, because you can get lost real easy in that. So I'm trying to turn this into cooking, touch, taste, smell, observation, things that are tangible and that you can really touch base with, so you can make a difference in your life with it. So Azotobacter, that was one of the nitrogen-fixing bacteria. We incorporate plants that are different nitrogen fixers, legumes, beans, all sorts of different things. Different types of small shrimp, earthworms, dragonfly larvae, daphnia. I don't think I have some pictures of some of those up there. Really incredible. So let's go on to this next shot here. This is a farm that we were building soil on Maui with on the dry side. And this is the rarest goose in the world. It's called a nene. They incorporated themselves into our system. We had a Japanese beetle problem. Turned out it was a perfect food source for the nene to eat the Japanese beetle. So at night, they would come through and pick my rows clean. They were invited to the place by the ponds that I set up. The ponds had fish in them. This is a very early stage. You can't see them here, but we incorporated it into the land to build the soil and to grow lots of plants. And we had a byproduct of creating a natural environment for these endangered species of bird that actually came and played our natural pest control. So it was really awesome. That was a really cool symbiotic relationship. That's called Laniapoko on Maui. Today, we live in a day and age where we should have learned from some of our mistakes by now. And also knowing that we have the technology to correct some of our mistakes by incorporating the good of technology, such as solar panels, atmospheric watering, some of the tools of modern time, from microscopes to time-lapse photography that allow us to observe on a whole nother level. What you're looking at in front of you is a fog catcher. We have diagrams of atmospheric waterers that will be up on our website here soon, different ways that we've created to help people understand that resources are abundant all around us. Sometimes you just have to like step back and look for them. When you notice water all over your car from condensation in the morning, you start to think, how could I water part of my garden with that in a place like Southern California where there's water crisis? So aquaponics, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, uses 2% of the water of conventional farming. Or the water's going into the ground, it's lost, it's getting run away. What does hold in the soil is getting lost through transpiration. And in aquaponics, which is a closed loop system, we're recirculating the water, so we're only using the 2% we lose is through evaporation and transpiration. That's pretty amazing. So that's another thing I think it's important in this day and age, and to be able to incorporate those things and try to take some of the mistakes and go there. Okay, so I think we're going a little deeper into nature-based aquaponic systems. Again, when you grow up with this around you as your backyard, you get a pretty good example of how to go, wow, maybe I could just mimic that. And a part of this is its beauty and its aesthetics. So the idea of being able to recreate something that works and recreate it on an aesthetic level as well, I think that's important. It makes us feel good. So we try to share that with people because it's inspiring. Experimenting with worms, plants, fish, building solar systems. That's the school that I got to grow up with and that I'm trying to share with others nowadays. The idea of educating our future generations and letting them, most of the kids want to play with worms anyway. They want to know where their food comes. You pull a carrot out of the ground for them, or you show them an aquaponic system, and they're all eyes. They want to be a part of it. Well, these are the guys that are going to stop the mistakes that our grandfathers made in front of us. When it comes time to just poisoning the land with petroleum and taking and giving nothing back to it, these are the guys that are going to look and say, wow, I never got to see a dodo bird or all the things that have gone extinct on the planet. So these guys are our future ambassadors of stewardship. So the idea for us is, as much as we can share with people and inspire them, I think that's the key to it. I'm trying not to bash too much everyone's gloom and doom and pointing all the negative effects of what are going on around us. I'm not disacknowledging those, but I'm trying to focus on solutions. And I think that with that idea of focusing on solutions, you start to look at what's around you and go, oh, hey, oh, wow, cool, that works. Let's check it out. So these ponds and this, what you see growing behind me in the background and all the kids in front of me looking at an earthworm, that's a 26-acre farm that was an old pineapple field that they were told they could grow nothing in, that it was completely dead. And within 6 months' time, you can see the banana trees behind you. We had grown several crops already, brought in zero fertilizer, created an earthworm population that's just through the roof, mind-blowing. And it was through aquaponics that were in the ground, but also the same things that we grow in the aquaponics and other things, incorporating them in the ground so that we could create biomasses so that the worms and the little creatures could just bioremediate the soil. And now that place gets a clean slate and it's an organic farm. So it went from something that was totally polluted, and through being tested by the university as well, now it has an organic status. And that's only within 3 years from the start of the project. Everything you see growing behind you there was within the first 9 months. So here's one of the ponds that nurtures that land. I think we're looking at now. A lot of people are into permaculture in this day and age. This particular farm that you see in the background here, this is a demonstration of permaculture, aquaculture, aquaponics, regenerative farming, all of it kind of encompassed together, where gravity's bringing the water down onto multiple orchards, which are placed in a way up the level of the hills where they get maximum sunlight, where the worms migrate, where all of the biomass produced by the pond and all of the food produced by the pond is incorporated back into the landscape. The waste products of the food incorporated on the land is incorporated back into the landscape. So it runs off of solar. and rainwater. Hawaii, that's a little bit easier to do in Southern California and other places we're in, but still there's a lot of ways to get creative. So the idea, I think that's turned a lot of people in permaculture off of aquaponics is I think they've incorporated it with hydroponics, or they've seen these more sterile versions. So in talking with permaculture enthusiasts, we noticed that there were very few who were employing the power of aquaponics. It seems to me that this is because what they saw aquaponics as a sterile and a part of the industrial way of thinking. And they were trying to get away from that whole monoculture thought. And they are still. So incorporating aquaponics into permaculture, that's where living earth systems comes in, and these ideas of holistic systems that are just as alive and sustainable as permaculture. So it's kind of like permaculture in a bucket in a sense. And then it spills out over the land, and it's like this fertility hub. With it, it spills earthworms and pill bugs and amphipods and azotobacter and mycorrhizal fungus. It follows the water downhill like it would in nature, and it nutrifies and nitrifies the land. So really amazing, the concept. By separating aquaponics from this, and from this paradigm and bringing it back to nature along with the technology of this modern age, nature-based aquaponics can bring more life and resilience to the land that you're caretaking. So you guys can hear me going through my notes there as well. Or you can simply bring nature into a small sterile setting like your apartment or a parking lot. A lot of the systems that we've been able to incorporate in such as inner city settings, or places where there is no soil to grow food, where you live in a city. Aquaponics really comes in then because you can grow fish, you can grow shrimp, you pretty much grow anything. And you can do it in a contained unit. You can do it indoor with lights. You can do it outdoors. So this is one of our breeding programs at one of our farms on Maui. It's inside under a solar enclosure. So into that. This is the outside of that same enclosure. This is another farm system. This is called Maui Moon Farm. This is on Maui. So if anybody's there, they can go visit it. It's a holistic system that's run off rainwater and solar panels. They do some teas, and they grow quite a bit of food out of the system. I couldn't even get into it. But you'll notice there's a disco ball in the center. That disco ball has lights shined on it at night, and all the insects come in there for a party. The tilapia eat them. It's a free protein source. It's natural. This is what I'm talking about, is incorporating common sense and what you see around you and incorporating that into the system. So this is a great version of that. Our approach is to create a system that mimics nature. We usually create a pond system, which is a way to grow a significant amount of biomass with water plants. We have housing for several different types of worms and breeding areas for several different types of creatures used in the system. From earthworms to copepods and shrimp, they ingest and hold on to probiotic cultures in their gut that help them to spread the cultures of mycorrhizal and other mycelium in the soil around the project, as well as into the surrounding compost piles. So again, I'm repeating myself on some of this, but repetition, I think for a lot, I'm spitting at you guys within an hour. Yeah, and if I'm talking a little fast for everyone, please excuse me. Anyone can let me know if I am, I would think, and they could give me a hands up, or they could tell me. It seems like I can get comments on here, but I'm trying to give you guys a whole lot of inspiration in a short time. You guys can follow up on any of this on our website. We're happy to share this, and I think with these guys, they're going to make this available for everyone. Okay, cool. Good. Thank you. Brian Wood, thanks for letting me know that. I'm hoping it's a good pace for everyone else. Okay, so it sounds like we're all good on that. Okay, thanks guys. Okay, so nature-based aquaponics is more of a permaculture holistic design for farms, but we utilize them in backyards, small indoor spaces. The idea of empowering people in inner city areas that do not have access to consistent water or land, it creates a way that no matter where you're at, you can grow food. You also play a part in the circle of nature, which I feel is fundamentally important to our physical, psychological health. I feel like that's what's missing from the human equation on our planet right now. So every one of these systems that I've set up for people, or regular aquaponic systems, or anything where anyone's growing food, there tends to be a closer bond to nature and more observation, growing kinship, just like they would for their animals. and they come to a closer understanding of nature. And that feels really cool. So that's one of the things that we like to share with people there. So let's go on to the next one here. So let's go into, we talked about this earlier. We'll give you a close-up of okay, well, that was an aquaponic system on an aquarium just trying to show people that works. So this is, what you're looking at in front of you is a Zolla, Azzolla, I believe. One Z, two L's. A Zolla is a floating fern. I think it, one in particular, the one that you see there is a native to Southern California. I can't remember the scientific name off the Zolla. There's just one. Pacifica, Azolla pacifica. So that's the West Coast Azolla that grows naturally here. It is a nitrogen fixer. Again, not like the Rhizobia or the Azotobacter. If you look at the purple on it, that's a bacteria that lives in a symbiotic relationship with it and fixes nitrogen from the atmosphere and or from the water around it. The roots from this Azolla carry the nitrifying bacteria on the bottom, on the surface area. So they create a carpet of filtration. Guess what? It's edible by humans and fish. So it's super high protein content. So it's one of the main additives to my fish food that I create within the aquaponic system. Part of the filter run is actually the food that the fish are creating for themselves. And then we like to add other things as well. It's also used for chickens, cows, agricultural feed, rather than taking up these giant fields and growing things that you're feeding for the animals. You could grow it all in aquaponics, one big farm, instead of having to graze or use multiple sources of food. Actually, I think grazing is the best, because then they're actually sequestering their carbon and allowing their manure to go in place. I don't know if you guys know of Joel Salatin, another really awesome farmer out there that's doing some really cool things. We'll try to put that up there somewhere, just like through management. It all boils down to is management, really, again and again. So the biomass that is created out of our system, whether it be a floating fern or a water plant or a soluble algae sludge that's left over, we incorporate this organic material into compost piles to create soil for the farming we do on land, as well as feed it to the other creatures and utilize it into some of our own food. We also create methane gas to burn in stoves out of this biomass, not to mention as food for the earthworms and the food for the fish who created it. Awesome. Just the whole idea of that. The creativity of a living system is almost unlimited as to where you want to take it. So our idea is to empower people with the tools and to say, yeah, you don't know how to build a static aquaponic system. They're throwing in so many loops that make it sound so intimidating. You need a bell siphon. No, you don't need a bell siphon. There's so many different ways that you can come to the same practices, and we're going to show you some of that. And I think you can look up a lot of that even closer on our website, and we'll explain some of those myths. So through the idea of being creative and incorporating things that you observe around you, that's what I'm trying to get to the basics of it for you. So let's go. Where are we at? Okay, so now we're going to come down back to where we started again, and we were talking about the aquaponics, and we're going to give you an idea of how to incorporate earth systems and bringing it down to a simple formula for the aquaponics components. Our main intention of this webinar is to inspire you to dig deeper. We're trying to arm you with the basic knowledge to let you start your own experiments. I think I said that already, but just to share that with you. So we're going to start off with the very first part of a system, which is a reservoir, place to keep your fish. That could be a giant fancy pool. It could be a pond that you dig. It could be a bathtub. It could be an aquarium. It could be a fancy pond on acres and acres that grows tons and tons of food. It's up to you which direction you want to take it and what you have available for you. I've literally created systems out of 5-gallon buckets. So I think to be inspired and not be intimidated, and know that if you want to get creative, you can get creative, you know. And so the next component of it, which I have incorporated into my systems, which I don't know if I have the greatest picture example for you guys, but basically the water goes into the sediment tank first. What you're looking at in front of you is actually a hexagon, and it's about 5 feet tall. by 3 feet in diameter, but it's a hexagon, so it's not quite a diameter, but close enough. It has a plant on the top of it that's known as vetiver grass. Vetiver grass, I would invite you guys all to look up on our website what vetiver grass is, because that's a whole nother thing I can get into. It has a 20-foot long vertical root system, one of the best plants in the world for erosion control. It absorbs heavy metals. So I found out a way to grow it in water in the aquaponic systems. It has a massive root system that actually will catch the sediment and process it first, holds tons of nitrifying bacteria. This one is in a swimming pool in Southern California, and it's one of the first, Vetiver. So Vetver. Oh, you want to chime in there? I'm sorry, I've got so much on my mind at the moment.
I'll do it in the chat.
Okay, yeah, I'll just spell it into there. So vetiver grass. If you look up online the vetiver system, it's being used all over the world in different applications. Most of it for soil erosion control. It's used. Has a vetiver oil, is well known in the perfume industry, used all over the place. The website for anyone that's looking on here, I see a question. It's called livingearthsystems.com. So I'll repeat that again. That's livingearthsystems.com. And the vetiver grass, so incorporating it into our aquaponic systems, you'll also notice that I think we'll show you some other slides where we're using it on the land, and we're creating gigantic compost piles out of it. And then we're throwing the earthworms and the creatures in it, and then we're flooding the fish water on it, and we're able to create tonnage of topsoil in a small area by what's planted in that area. One of the advantages of using something like vetiver grass with a deep root system in the ground is that it actually pulls up minerals from way deep below the subsoils that wouldn't be touched by plants on the surface normally. It allows that to be brought to the surface in a mineral-rich biomass, the leaves of the plant, that we can cut every couple weeks, lay them onto the soil, or create piles with them, and we can literally build soil with just the grass and earthworms and the water from the ponds that we dump on it. Okay, so let's go on and say, so a sediment tank is basically the first line of defense. You don't have to have a plant in it and start that nitrifying process. This is a swimming pool one. Normally that would be the next phase here, which is, there's actually one spot that's missing that's before this. It's a gravel bed would be the next component to it. But I think we have it in a different order set up here. So the sediment tank basically catches the water, allows all the sediment to drop to the bottom, and then flows out of the top. We can use the sediment that's left in that tank. We can flush it onto our farm system on land and use the solids incorporated with our biomass to create soil with. So the next level is what you see here. The plants, rather than using styrofoam that floats in the water, we're using untreated pine. It's sealed with beeswax and it's burned to preserve it. The plants are in 3-inch net containers with a 3-inch hole, and the roots hang down into the system. I think we have another one that might actually show the roots. Was there one or before or after that?
I will show that in 1 minute.
Okay. Yeah, so I think we'll show some different roots of that somewhere. Oh yeah, a couple of slides up. We don't need to show them right now, but you guys can see that later. So this is another way that it's done. These are old sewer pipes. This was some trash pulled out of the backyard on Maui that we wanted to show this restaurant that you could take your old sewer pipes and grow a bunch of lettuce with them. There's like a 10-gallon reservoir that's growing all these heads of lettuce at the end of it. And that's really simple. There's like 5 tilapia in there, maybe 10 tilapia in there. Water circulating through these pipes and back into it. No sediment tank, no gravel tank, none of the above. So if you set up a system right, you can, as long as you have nitrogen and you have bacteria and surface area to process it, it'll work. So the picture I showed you before, which was the root containment tank, that's where the roots are absorbing the nutrients as it passes by them. And the nitrifying bacteria on the bottom of the root system is actually processing the ammonia and nitrites into nitrates, which are useful to the plants and harmless to the fish. So again, I'm just repeating myself on that, but that's basically how it works. For pipe, we recommend, if you're going to use pipe, we recommend 4-inch pipe with 3-inch holes cut for 3-inch baskets to be inserted. I think we will provide a diagram of this in some way, shape, or form. Everyone who's present with this, that we have your email address, we will email you all a diagram of exactly how this is done as well. with supplies and where to source them and such. So we recommend 4-inch pipe with 3-inch pipes. A gravel bed. A gravel bed can be anything you create as a gravel bed. Here's one in particular. Normally it would go from the sediment tank to the gravel bed to the pipes or boxes with the roots in them, which I think we showed in that diagram, but our slide was mixed up here. So this is the gravel bed. Basically it's filled with gravel. The lower 6 inches of it, there actually is no gravel. There's a hollow space at the bottom that allows all the water to suck out of it. The water fills up in this tank to about 4 inches below the gravel. And then when it gets to the top, it automatically sucks down through the bottom by what's known as a U siphon. We'll explain that to you guys. A lot of things that intimidate people with aquaponics is what's called a bell siphon. It has moving parts in it, and it gets a little confusing for people. So we're going to show you one, I think here or within our website, that's called a U siphon. That's really, really, really super easy, and it'll drain that gravel bed every time. In this gravel bed, earthworms live, copepods live, all sorts of other little creatures actually live in the gravel bed. So I came to the conclusion of keeping earthworms in the gravel beds through when I was a child. I had a fish tank with an aerator in it, and that's a air pump that blows bubbles into it. And some earthworms had migrated right off the top of a garden that I had there, and they fell into my aquarium. Well, I actually kept those earthworms in that aerator for months at a time underwater. And then I did a little bit of homework, and I realized that they can breathe through their skin. So they have the ability to, as long as the water has a lot of oxygen in it, to actually live and work underwater and within the gravel bed. So that's one of the ways that we realize that. The gravel bed allows them to process and catch some of the more solids in the system that make it through the sediment tank. And it's also another way to grow onions and potatoes and all sorts of other things that we grow in the gravel beds. So the suspended root tank, I think, is the next one here. That's what we were showing you in the beginning. That's what normally would be after the gravel beds. So it would come through a sediment tank, gravel beds, and then it would go into the suspended root tank. So if you see all the roots in the bottom there, that's where the plants, their roots are growing right into the water. The water's passing through the roots. This is in a swimming pool that we set up in Southern California. So they're growing all their food off their swimming pool, and their swimming pool doesn't have a chemical signature of all the things that are being dumped out of the backwash onto the land. So they're actually creating fertility out of their land rather than hindering it with chlorine products and growing lots of food. Anything, you could do that in anything that'll suspend them over it. Most people use styrofoam blocks and create holes in it, and then they float the blocks on top of it. So the medium that the plants grow in. I showed you guys clay balls before, and standard aquaponics, that's pretty much the medium, is clay balls. I think they have incorporated gravel beds in some areas, and they may use some coconut husk in some of their systems. All depends. I'm not super familiar with the standard aquaponics, only the ones I've created myself. So what are in the mediums, I tend to use crushed rock from wherever the local area is, and then you can use hay, dried grass, peat moss, coconut husk. The reason I say coconut husk, and I recommend that, is it's a real good medium and it's sustainably sourced. It helps some of the Pacific Islands that actually are able to utilize that and use it as a source sustainably. And it holds a lot of beneficial bacteria. It's great at incorporating oxygen, and the worms don't really eat it. They'll eat what's around it, and they use it more as a medium. So I like incorporating, let's start this off again, gravel from your local area, crushed rock facility somewhere, coconut husk as the basics of it. And then what I do for my systems is I introduce a lot of other things in there. So I start out with a compost pile outside and a worm bin. And in that compost pile, I tend to inoculate it with different myceliums, being fungus that originally will create a mushroom in most sorts. But these myceliums start to break down the wood. I inoculated with the azotobacter as well, which helps to break it down, wood chip compost piles, along with some of our food scraps from the house. Let the worms are also in that pile. They eat it. Then we stick a 5-gallon bucket of coconut husk into there, and the worms crawl up into the bucket. We take a handful of the culture they came out of, And then we take that and we mix it with the stone, the crushed rock. That's our medium, basically. In there, within that system, within that compost pile, we've introduced most of the little creatures, and they actually find their way right into that gravel mix. That's also what we fill the gravel bed with. So the gravel bed has a lot of those creatures in it. The top 4 inches never get touched by water of the gravel bed. We'll explain this out in detail in the systems that we send you, and we'll explain how that works. So incorporating the worms and all the creatures with this gravel bed, when the water first comes into there, it allows the creatures to process it. Where are we at now? That medium that I'm talking about is what's in this 3-inch cup you see in front of you here. Some kale in there, and in there there's crushed blue rock, which is what we use in Hawaii, which is a very similar product in Southern California that I've noticed all over the place. And most places I've been to, some quarry crushes some rock that's local to your area. It tends to have more minerals in it than clay balls, which have 0 minerals in it, which take electricity and petroleum to fire them because they're actually a clay that's fired into ceramic. And just all the way around the board. The worms crawl through it better, the natural rock that's crushed. So the roots come out of it and the plant is able to grow. That's a 3-inch pot you're seeing there, a 3-inch net pot. I think we'll include that as well where we share it with you guys. A water pump. That's our next one there. So the basics of the system is you pump water. This is a really simple low watt solar pump you see here. There's a solar panel to the side. It pumps water out of the system through the rest of the system. So that could be any kind of water pump. It could be anything from a 2-watt pump to a solar pump to a gigantic industrial pool pump. All depends how big your system is. I like to utilize gravity as much as possible. So if I can put a system where the pump is at the bottom and I just pump it up to the top and gravity does the rest of the work for me through the linear fashion I set the system up in and allow the water to flow through it. So you'll also see diagrams of that, I'm sure, on our website. Oxygen, like we talked about in the beginning. Oxygen can be a paddle wheel. It can be the flow of the water dumping, running over rocks, dumping into another container. It can be air bubbles that are pumped through a compressor right underwater and they float to the surface. What we're looking to do is we're looking to absorb oxygen into the system. Also, the larger the surface area you have, the larger your surface area compared to depth of water, that can create more oxygen. That's not always true in a hot area. That can work against you in a real southern climate where depth can hold cooler water on the bottom, which will hold more oxygen for you. So there's a lot of variations of how to do it. Giant scale on the land or a swimming pool or an aquarium in your backyard. Okay, optional into here, I don't believe we have any pictures or anything in here of this, is a sump. A sump is a main place where your water sits before anything else happens. And that's off a system that's set up to pump from the sump into the fish tank, and from the fish tank into the sediment tank, from the sediment tank into the gravel bed, from the gravel bed into the pipes, and the pipes back into the sump. So that creates a lot more of your solids being able to be siphoned out of your sediment tank and your sump. I'm sure you guys can find tons of diagrams online. Some systems, you can do a system without a siphon. A lot of people think that the gravel beds, the water needs to come up below 4 inches beneath the surface and then suck down. That's not true. Sometimes it can be as simple as running a piece of pipe through the gravel. And again, we'll send you diagrams on that, and allowing the water to go through the gravel underneath it or not get all of the gravel entirely wet. So a sump isn't an essential part. And the only reason I'm telling you guys this is if you go and you look at aquaponic forums, you're going to be convinced that you need to do it this certain way with a siphon and a sump. We're going to try to show you different examples and make them available to you guys. And feel free to ask us any questions on our website as well, anytime. Right, and ask us any questions now. So a U-siphon, I thought we had a picture of it in here somewhere, but I don't think we did. So we're not going to worry about that. But now I'm going to give you a picture of a general system. You want to click to the next one here? So I don't have a pointer to be able to point this for you guys. Or do they see my pointer on my screen? Probably not, huh? Okay. Well, on the bottom, the blue tank on this one is a 600-gallon reservoir. It goes into a sediment tank on the top of it, which is the square box that you see with plants floating on the top of it on a piece of styrofoam, the white box. Then it comes out of the white box to the end of the pipes that you see, the very far end, and then it travels back down the pipes into the red square tank that you see. From the red square tank, it falls back into the blue reservoir. So this is a system that does not have a sump, but this is a very basic aquaponic system that I designed that will send you guys basically the plans for, and you guys can create this yourself. This is out of 4-inch PVC pipe. This is a utility sink in a 600-gallon reservoir. This system will grow, I think, 300 heads of lettuce every 6 weeks. So we set these up for schools and allow them to use these systems to create programs for their school so they can bring in some income.
Hey, Eddie.
Hello? Yep.
On the top of your screen there, you'll see a bar. One of the options is annotate.
A bar with annotate? Do you see a bar on the top of my screen?
So can I talk?
Or it's got to be, I guess.
So it's on my screen and I can't see my mouse right now, so I can't really figure out how to do anything.
Oh, okay.
Does that happen to other people? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No,
My mouse disappeared.
Yeah, and I
probably,
can find that bar.
probably because you're in full
Because we're not sharing your screen.
screen mode. Yeah.
Maybe I'll just escape and see if I can annotate. Bammo.
Sorry guys, I would love to be able to see. So there's another one that has a mouse.
Wait, okay. Let me. Yeah, I'll just do it with this.
Okay, sorry about the lapse there, guys. Growing up in a remote valley like I did, you guys can imagine I'm not so super computer savvy. Although everything that I tell you in this, I've backed up, dotted my I's and crossed my T's through the years, because not having a conventional education and trying to create these systems, I was questioned many times, and I wanted to make sure if I was sharing them with people that the enthusiasm wouldn't get ahead of the facts. I think it's really important that you cross your T's and dot your I's. So I've come to these conclusions through much trial and error, but also through research as well, to make sure that my experiments have been based on solid, sound science.
We're now over an hour.
Okay, should I go right into questions?
Ask
Josiah, how am I messing up your schedule on this?
Nope, don't worry about it. Yeah, keep going.
Okay, I can push through some of it pretty quick. So earlier I said, if you guys can see my clicker, is it on there now or is it not on there? We're starting out with the blue tank on the bottom, which is the reservoir. That's where the fish live. The water's getting pumped out of there into the white square box that there's a thing going around now. That has a floating styrofoam piece in it that floats up and down with plants in 3-inch pots that the roots are suspended. If you look onto the bottom of that white container, there's another square. That's where the settlement, there's a valve on there that the settlement gets pulled out of the tank to be used in your earthworms or in your garden. Okay, so let's get back up to the white box. The white pipe that you see coming out of it, the water goes down to the end of the pipes where you're following the cursor now. And at the end of those pipes, it distributes itself into these 4-inch pipes. These 4-inch pipes have 3-inch holes cut in them with 3-inch baskets with plants in them. The water circulates the way you see the cursor going into the next barrel, which has more plants in it. And usually there's shrimp in that one and fish on the bottom, giant river prawns or other creatures that a lot of people get creative with different things they want to grow. But then the water comes out of that one and drops back into the fish reservoir. That reservoir can hold almost 200 pounds of fish that can be grown out in 9 to 18 months that you can eat, and will create, I think, 300 heads of lettuce every 6 weeks. 6 to 8 weeks, depending on staying on your planting schedule and such. So that's good. It's a good way to introduce people to the basics of it. Before putting fish into any system that you build, I want to underline that you must deal with the potential chlorine and chloramine. So in our water systems, in your conventional water that you're getting into your house, they tend to use chlorine to disinfect, but also a littler known one that's called chloramine. Chloramine tends to settle, and it doesn't come out of your system through evaporation like chlorine does. So you either need to treat it with UV, set it in the sunlight, or there's water treatments that you can buy that will take it out. Most of them are fairly benign. So that's something that you must know. So it can sit in the sunlight for at least 5 days and get full penetration, or you can treat it with a UV light. Either one of those things will work to take the chloramine out. Really important. The types of water creatures that you can put into a system. Anything from koi, like for actually what you want to farm. Do you just want to see something beautiful, or do you want to eat something? That's a pretty large scale, by the way. That prawn's body is almost 12 inches long. And that's the Rosenberg macrobranchium. We raise those here as well, and we incorporate those into systems in Southern California here and in Hawaii. Great eating shrimp. They eat detritus. They play a great part in the system. Aquaponic systems can take on various different forms. This one has a giant pond system below it. This actually hasn't been planted yet. It was just formed. Sediment tank is connected to it on the back. So they can be really aesthetic, or they can be really commercial looking. The idea of whatever shape or form that inspires you, that's what's basically important. So examples of nature-based aquaponics in full systems, a taro patch in Hawaii. These water, where our taro grows in the fields, the water comes from the stream. We run it right through the fields. And while our fields have water in them like rice fields, we tend to raise the prawns and the tilapia in isolated ponds so they can't make their way back into the stream. So this is where I came to what we call aquaponics from this you see in front of you right here. Some of the different farms, I think we showed you this earlier. I want you guys to look at this one for a second, because this is Maui Moon Farm, and this incorporates a 40,000 gallon pond system into a man-made aquaponic runway in the ground. It grows so much food, I can't even begin to tell you. Thousands of pounds of bananas, turmeric, coffee, tea. Here, the fish feed on an exclusive diet of moringa mixed with azolla and coconuts that we grow. We grow the coconuts, we squeeze the coconut cream out of them, we use the leftover fiber, we mix that with the azolla and another plant known as moringa. I would tell you guys to look that one up, Moringa oleifera. I'll try and give a reference to that. I think it's on our website as well. One of the most nutrient-dense plants on the planet. So to be able to eat that yourself and feed that to your fish, you're growing some of the most nutrient-dense fish on the planet as well. So this one is filled with rainwater and powered by solar. And it's also very super aesthetic. They do weddings, and what you're seeing here is actually before it was finished. This was in the very early stages. It's about 2 years in now, fully functional and awesome. That's Maui Moon Farm in the North Shore of Maui. What you're seeing in front of you now is a swimming pool in Southern California. This is in the very beginning of the setup as well. Tons of food growing in it. It's about 1.5 years in, crystal clear water. Awesome. Just the idea of turning your swimming pool. That's the one that actually nurtured that parking lot that we turned into a paradise. So just an example of that. And what else I should say? We're going to be doing a giveaway. We're giving away, I think, almost $300 worth of stuff. Upgrade your garden. We're giving away, I think, a soil course and a couple of composters, or a composter, a whole batch of seeds, and a weather station. I think that's included. Again, I think you can go to our website. Looks like it might be pulling up here for you guys now. So go to that thing and you'll check it out. It's pretty awesome. We just launched it today. So I think that giveaway will be complete in January, and we're just wanted to share some cool things with people as well. So check it out. And I think we're probably at that area of questions and answers right now. Thank you everybody too as well for listening. And I hope that I've given you some useful information here. And like I said, the best way is to follow up. Feel free to contact us anytime. We're people, and we love to share with people.